I'm Beverly, 29 years old, and I never thought I'd be standing at my brother's Texas ranch wedding holding an envelope that would destroy everything they thought they knew about their perfect little family. 11 years ago, my mother shoved $50 into my palm and slammed the door in my face, telling me I'd never amount to anything without them. They thought they'd buried me. Today, I was here to return the favor. Before I tell you how I went from sleeping in my car to owning the house that raised me, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this family reunion ends. Growing up in our three-bedroom house on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, I always knew I was different from the rest of my family. My father, Harold, worked as a construction contractor, spending his days building homes for other families while barely holding ours together. My mother, Martha, worked part-time at a local insurance office, but her real job seemed to be making sure everyone knew exactly where they stood in our family hierarchy. At the top was my older brother, Glenn, the golden child who could do no wrong. When Glenn wanted guitar lessons at age 12, somehow the money appeared. When he needed new clothes for school, Martha would drive him to the mall and let him pick out whatever he wanted from the name brand stores. When Glenn decided he wanted to try out for the baseball team, Harold took time off work to coach him personally. Then there was me, always scrambling for the leftover attention and resources. While Glenn got music lessons, I got a list of chores that seemed to grow longer every week. While he got new clothes, I wore hand-me-downs from neighbors and cousins I'd never met. While he got encouragement and support for every dream he had, I got lectures about being realistic and not getting too big for my britches. The house itself told the story of our family's priorities. Glenn's room was in the front with two large windows facing the street, and enough space for all his sports equipment and musical instruments. My room was barely bigger than a closet tucked away in the back corner, where the air conditioning barely reached in summer and the heating couldn't quite warm in winter. What I didn't know then, what would take me years to discover, was that this house held secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The house had been built by my great-grandfather in 1952, passed down through generations of strong women who worked hard and saved every penny. My grandmother Margaret had been the last in that line of strong women, and she'd had very specific plans for what would happen to her legacy. But at 16, 17, 18 years old, all I knew was that I felt like a stranger in my own home. Glenn would sit at the dinner table telling stories about his day, his friends, his plans, while Harold and Martha hung on every word like he was delivering the evening news. When I tried to share something from my day about my grades or my part-time job at the local bookstore, the conversation would somehow always drift back to Glenn within minutes. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was written into the fabric of our daily lives, sewn into every family dinner, every holiday, every moment when we were all supposed to be together. Glenn got the benefit of the doubt in every argument. Glenn got the front seat in the car. Glenn got asked about his opinion on family decisions, while I was simply told what had already been decided. School became my refuge. I threw myself into my studies with the kind of desperation that only comes from knowing that education was my only ticket out. I maintained a 4.0 grade point average throughout high school, not because learning came easily to me, but because I studied while other kids were socializing, because I spent my Friday nights at the library instead of at parties, because I knew that every A was another step closer to freedom. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was the first adult who ever looked at my grades and saw potential instead of an obligation. She was the one who helped me apply for scholarships, who stayed after school to help me practice for interviews, who believed that a girl from a working-class family in Austin could make something of herself if she was willing to work for it. When the acceptance letter from University of Texas arrived, with a full scholarship offer, I thought my family would finally see what I was capable of. I thought they'd be proud. I thought this would be the moment when everything changed between us. I was wrong. The fight that ended my childhood started over something that should have been a celebration. It was 3 days after graduation, and I was sitting at our kitchen table with the scholarship paperwork spread out in front of me. The University of Texas was offering me a full ride to study business administration, with additional stipends for books and living expenses. It was everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed about since I was old enough to understand that college was how you changed your life. Harold was sitting across from me, squinting at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Martha was standing behind him, her arms crossed, wearing the expression she usually reserved for when she found out Glenn had gotten another speeding ticket she'd have to help him pay. "Business administration," Harold said, shaking his head. "What kind of job is that supposed to get you?" "It's a foundation degree, Dad," I explained, trying to keep my voice patient. "I can go into management consulting, eventually start my own company. The earning potential is really good and—" "Earning potential," Martha interrupted with a laugh that had no humor in it. "Listen to her, Harold. Our little girl thinks she's going to be some kind of businesswoman." The contempt in her voice hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected surprise, maybe even some resistance, but I hadn't expected mockery. "Mom, I've been working toward this for years. My grades, my test scores, everything shows that I can succeed in this field." "What shows is that you've gotten too big for your britches," she snapped back. "You know what would be practical nursing. You could get a 2-year degree, start working right away, and still be able to take care of family when the time comes." "Take care of family," I repeated, feeling my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Harold and Martha exchanged a look that I'd seen 1,000 times before, the look that said they'd already discussed this and made their decision without including me in the conversation. "We mean that your father and I aren't getting any younger," Martha said, her voice taking on the tone she used when she wanted to make you feel guilty for even questioning her. "Someone's going to need to be around to help us as we get older. Glenn's going to have his own family to worry about." The implication was clear. Glenn was free to live his life, to chase his dreams, to build whatever future he wanted. I was expected to limit my education, my career prospects, my entire life so that I could be available to serve as the family caregiver when the time came. "I can't do that," I said quietly, and even I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I can't give up this opportunity." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Harold's face was getting red the way it did when he'd been drinking and someone challenged him. Martha's mouth was pressed into a thin line that meant I was about to hear exactly what she thought of my selfishness. "You can't do that," Martha repeated, her voice rising. "You can't do that. Let me tell you what you can't do, young lady. You can't live under our roof, eat our food, and use our resources while you disrespect everything we've sacrificed to give you." "I'm not disrespecting anything," I said, standing up from the table. "I'm trying to make something of myself. Isn't that what you want?" "What we want," Harold said, his voice low and threatening, "is for you to show some gratitude and some common sense. This family has bent over backwards for you for 18 years. That's when Glenn walked in from the living room, where he'd apparently been listening to the entire conversation. My brother looked at the scholarship papers scattered across the table, looked at our parents' angry faces, and then looked at me with something I'd never seen from him before: disappointment. "Come on, Bev," he said, using the nickname he hadn't called me since we were kids. "They're right. You're being selfish here. This family has always been there for you, and the first chance you get to pay it back, you want to run off and play businesswoman." The betrayal hit me harder than anything my parents had said. This was my brother, the person who'd grown up in the same house, who'd seen the same favoritism, who knew exactly how different our experiences had been. And he was taking their side. "I've worked for this, Glenn," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I've earned this." "You've earned the right to turn your back on your family," Martha asked, her voice dripping with hurt and anger. "You think you're so smart, but you'll come crawling back when real life hits you. You'll see how far all that education gets you when you don't have family to fall back on." The argument continued for another hour, with voices getting louder and positions getting more entrenched. I tried to explain that accepting the scholarship didn't mean I was abandoning the family that I could still visit, still help out when needed. But they weren't interested in compromise. They wanted complete surrender. Finally exhausted and heartbroken, I went to my room and started making plans. If they couldn't support my dreams, if they couldn't even pretend to be happy about this opportunity, then I'd find a way to make it work without them. I should have known they wouldn't let me have the last word. The next morning, I woke up to find garbage bags full of my belongings sitting on the front porch. My clothes, my books, my few personal items, everything I owned was packed up like trash waiting for collection. Harold was standing in the doorway with $50 in his hand, and an expression I'd never seen before, cold and final. "You want to be independent so bad," he said, holding out the money. "Here's your start." Behind him, Martha appeared with her arms crossed and her jaw set in determination. "Don't come back until you learn some respect," she said, and then she slammed the door with a sound that seemed to echo through my chest. I stood there on the porch for a long time, looking at those garbage bags and trying to process what had just happened. At 18 years old, I was homeless with $50 to my name and a car that might or might not make it through the summer. But I also had a full scholarship to the University of Texas and a determination that had been forged in years of being overlooked and underestimated. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about family loyalty. What they actually taught me was that I was completely on my own and I'd better get used to it fast. The first night I slept in my Honda Civic parked behind a 24-hour diner near campus, I cried until I couldn't breathe. The car was cramped and stuffy, the parking lot was loud with traffic from the highway, and every time I tried to get comfortable, the steering wheel or gear shift would dig into my ribs or my back. But by the second night, I'd stopped crying and started planning. I used my $50 to buy a gym membership at the campus recreation center, which gave me access to showers, lockers, and a place to store my school supplies during the day. I figured out which parking lots were safe to sleep in and which security guards would move me along versus which ones would pretend they didn't see my car if I was quiet and clean. My scholarship covered tuition and fees, but I needed money for food gas and the thousand small expenses that come with being a college student. I found work at a coffee shop that opened at 5:30 in the morning, which meant I could work the opening shift shower at the gym and still make it to my 8 o'clock classes on time. The early mornings were brutal, especially when I'd only gotten a few hours of sleep in the car, but the job came with free coffee and pastries that didn't sell the day before. Between that and the cheapest meals I could find on campus, I managed to keep myself fed on about $15 a week. My afternoons were for classes and studying, but I quickly realized that I needed more income than the coffee shop could provide. I started tutoring other students in math and economics, charging $20 an hour for skills that had always come naturally to me. Word spread quickly that I was good at explaining complex concepts in ways that made sense, and by the end of my first semester, I had a waiting list of students who wanted help. Evenings I worked as a server at a restaurant near campus. The tips were decent, especially on weekends, and the job came with one free meal per shift, which meant I could eat something more substantial than coffee shop leftovers and ramen noodles. 3 jobs, plus a full course load. Didn't leave much time for socializing, but I'd never been good at making friends anyway. I was too focused on survival to worry about missing out on the typical college experience of parties and football games and late-night conversations in dorm hallways. My professors started to notice my work ethic, especially Professor William Davis in the business department. Professor Davis was the kind of teacher who'd built his reputation on being tough but fair, and he had a way of pushing students to think beyond what they thought they were capable of. "Miss Beverly," he said after class one day during my sophomore year, "do you have a few minutes to talk?" I glanced at my watch, calculating how much time I had before my tutoring appointment. "Sure, Professor. I've been watching your work in my classes, and I think you have real potential in this field," he said, settling back in his chair. "Have you thought about applying for internships? There are some excellent opportunities with investment firms here in Austin." I almost laughed at the suggestion. Internships were for students who could afford to work for little or no pay, students who had family support, and didn't need to work 3 jobs just to keep themselves fed and housed. "I appreciate the suggestion, Professor, but I don't think I'm in a position to take an internship right now," I said carefully. Professor Davis studied my face for a moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing more than I wanted to reveal. "What if I told you that some of these internships are paid positions?" he asked. "Good pay, too. $15 an hour, which is more than you're probably making at most part-time jobs." $15 an hour was more than I made at any of my 3 jobs. It was the kind of money that could change everything for me, that could mean sleeping in an actual bed instead of my car, eating regular meals, maybe even having a few dollars left over at the end of each month. "I'd be very interested," I said, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. Professor Davis smiled and pulled out a business card. "I know someone at Sterling Investment Group who's looking for bright, hardworking students. I'll put in a good word for you, but you'll still need to interview and prove yourself." The interview was the most nerve-wracking hour of my life up to that point. I borrowed a professional outfit from the campus career center, spent my last $10 on a portfolio folder to hold my resume and transcripts, and practiced answering common interview questions until I could recite them in my sleep. The managing director who interviewed me was a sharp woman in her 40s named Patricia Chen, who asked pointed questions about my grades, my goals, and my understanding of the financial services industry. "I see you're working multiple jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, she said, looking over my resume. "That's impressive time management. Tell me how you prioritize when everything feels urgent." I thought about lying about making up some answer that sounded professional and polished. Instead, I decided to tell the truth. "Everything is urgent when you're trying to survive," I said. "I prioritize based on what will have the biggest impact on my ability to stay in school and keep moving toward my goals. My grades come first because without them I lose my scholarship. Work comes second because without money I can't eat or put gas in my car. Everything else is negotiable." Patricia smiled for the first time during the interview. That's exactly the kind of practical thinking we value here. "When can you start?" The internship changed everything. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I could afford to rent a small studio apartment near campus. It wasn't much, just 400 square feet with a hot plate and a bathroom the size of a closet, but it was mine. I had a bed to sleep in, a door I could lock, a place where I belonged. More importantly, the work itself was fascinating. I was learning about financial markets, investment strategies, and business development from people who were building real wealth and creating real value. My supervisors started giving me more complex projects, trusting me with client research and market analysis that actually contributed to the firm's success. By my junior year, I'd earned a reputation as one of the most reliable and insightful interns the firm had ever had. When they offered me a full-time position after graduation starting at $45,000 a year, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Graduation day was bittersweet. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do, proven that I could succeed without my family's support, but there was still a part of me that hoped they might show up. I saved 2 seats at the ceremony, just in case Harold and Martha decided to surprise me. The seats stayed empty. After the ceremony, I drove myself to a nice restaurant and ordered the most expensive meal on the menu. I ate alone, toasting my success with a glass of wine and trying to convince myself that this was exactly what independence was supposed to feel like. But even as I celebrated, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I'd proven I could survive on my own, but I wanted more than survival. I wanted success that would make it impossible for anyone to ever look down on me again. My first year at Sterling Investment Group taught me that success in business was about more than just working hard. It was about understanding people, anticipating market trends, and building relationships that could open doors you didn't even know existed. I threw myself into learning everything I could about the industry. I read financial newspapers during my lunch breaks, attended evening seminars on investment strategies, and volunteered for projects that would give me exposure to different aspects of the business. My direct supervisor, Margaret Kim, was a senior analyst who'd built her career on spotting undervalued companies before anyone else noticed them. She took me under her wing and taught me how to read between the lines of financial statements, how to research management teams and competitive landscapes, how to present complex analysis in ways that busy executives could understand and act on. The secret to this business, Margaret told me during one of our weekly check-ins, is remembering that numbers tell stories. Your job is to figure out what story the numbers are really telling, not just what story the company wants you to hear. Within 6 months, I was contributing analysis that was directly influencing the firm's investment decisions. Within a year, I was leading research projects and presenting my findings to senior partners. My salary jumped to $55,000 after my first performance review, then to $75,000 when I was promoted to senior analyst at age 24. But even as my career was taking off, I couldn't stop thinking about my family. I'd drive past my old neighborhood, sometimes slowing down when I passed the house where I'd grown up, wondering if they ever thought about me, if they ever regretted how things had ended. I told myself I was over it, that I'd moved on and built a life that was better than anything I could have had if I'd stayed. But late at night, when I was alone in my apartment, I'd find myself imagining what it would be like to show up at their door successful and confident, and see the look on their faces when they realized what I'd accomplished. By 25, I'd saved enough money to start my own consulting firm. Texas Strategic Solutions began as a one-woman operation working out of my apartment, but I had a vision for something bigger. I wanted to help small and medium-sized businesses optimize their operations, identify growth opportunities, and navigate the complex world of finance and strategy. My first client was a family-owned restaurant chain that was struggling with cash flow and expansion planning. I spent 3 months analyzing their operations, identifying inefficiencies, and developing a growth strategy that would allow them to open 2 new locations without overextending their resources. The project was a huge success. Within 6 months, the restaurant owners had implemented my recommendations and were seeing significant improvements in profitability. They referred me to other business owners who referred me to others, and soon I had more work than I could handle on my own. I hired my first employee, then my second, then moved into a real office space in downtown Austin. By 27, Texas Strategic Solutions had 15 employees and annual revenues of over $2 million. We were working with clients across Texas and beginning to expand into other markets. The business success felt incredible, but it also felt hollow in ways I hadn't expected. I had money, respect, and professional recognition, but I still felt like something was missing. I'd built all of this success partly to prove something to my family, but they weren't there to see it. That's when I decided it was time to find out what had happened to them since I'd been gone. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I wasn't planning to reach out or reconnect. I just wanted to know how their lives had turned out, whether they ever thought about the daughter they'd thrown away. I hired a private investigator named James Morrison, explaining that I wanted basic information about my family's current situation. Nothing invasive, just public records and general circumstances. What James found changed everything I thought I knew about my family and my past. The manila envelope James Morrison handed me 3 weeks later felt heavier than it should have, like it contained more than just papers and photographs. I waited until I was alone in my office that evening before opening it, pouring myself a glass of wine, and settling into the leather chair I'd bought to celebrate my first $1 million year. The first document was a property record search for my childhood home. According to the county records, the house had been purchased in 1952 by my great-grandfather Thomas Thompson and passed down through the family for 3 generations. My grandmother Margaret had been the last official owner before her death in 2010. That lined up with what I remembered. Grandma Margaret had died during my junior year of high school, and I'd always assumed the house had passed to my parents. What I found next made my hands shake. Margaret Thompson's last will and testament, filed with Travis County Probate Court, contained a provision that I'd never known existed. The house and an accompanying $50,000 inheritance were to be held in trust for me until my 21st birthday. According to the will, I was supposed to receive both the property deed and the money when I turned 21, with my parents serving as trustees until that time. I read the document 3 times before the implications fully sank in. My 21st birthday had been almost 8 years ago. I should have inherited the house and the money during my junior year of college when I was sleeping in my car and working 3 jobs just to survive. The next document in the file was even more shocking. Harold Thompson had filed papers with the county clerk's office in 2011, claiming that Margaret's original will had been lost and presenting a new version that left everything to him and Martha as joint inheritors. The probate judge had accepted the revised will without requiring extensive verification, apparently taking Harold's word that the original had been destroyed in a house fire. But James had found a copy of the original will in Margaret's attorney's files, and there had never been any house fire. Harold had simply lied to steal my inheritance. The current property records showed that Harold had taken out a home equity loan against the house in 2013, borrowing $120,000 to start a construction business that had failed within 2 years. He'd refinanced the mortgage twice since then, and the current balance was over $180,000. According to James's research, Harold had been laid off from his construction job 2 years ago and hadn't found steady work since. Martha was working part-time at a grocery store making barely above minimum wage. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments and had received a foreclosure notice from the bank. The house that should have been mine that my grandmother had specifically left to me was about to be lost because my parents had stolen my inheritance and gambled it away on a failed business venture. But the betrayal went even deeper than that. The final document in James's file was a copy of a letter from Margaret's attorney to Harold, dated just 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. The letter referenced a conversation in which the attorney had reminded Harold about the terms of Margaret's will and the upcoming transfer of property to me when I turned 21. Glenn had been copied on that letter. My brother had known about my inheritance from the beginning. He'd known when they kicked me out of the house, known when I was sleeping in my car, known when I was working 3 jobs just to survive that I was legally entitled to the house and $50,000. He'd known, and he'd said nothing. I sat in my office until well past midnight reading through the documents again and again, trying to process the scope of their betrayal. They hadn't just been unsupportive of my dreams or disappointed in my choices. They'd actively stolen from me, lied to authorities, and watched me struggle while sitting on money and property that legally belonged to me. The next morning, I called the bank that held the mortgage on my childhood home. As a successful business owner with excellent credit, I was able to arrange to purchase the mortgage from them at a slight discount. Within 2 weeks, I was the legal owner of the debt, which meant I had the power to foreclose on the property. But I didn't want to just take the house back. I wanted justice, and I wanted them to know exactly who was delivering it. I hired the best real estate attorney in Austin and had him prepare all the necessary paperwork for an eviction notice. According to Texas law, I had to give them 30 days written notice before beginning foreclosure proceedings. I could have had the notice delivered by a process server or certified mail. Instead, I decided to deliver it personally, and I knew exactly when and where I wanted to do it. 3 days later, I received an unexpected piece of mail that felt like the universe was orchestrating the perfect moment for justice. It was a wedding invitation addressed to Beverly Thompson at my business address. Someone had done some detective work to track me down. Glenn was getting married. The ceremony would be held at a ranch venue in the hill country outside Austin with a reception to follow. The invitation was expensive, printed on heavy cardstock with gold embossing, the kind of thing that cost at least $5 per invitation. Given their financial situation, I had to assume the bride's family was paying for the wedding. A little more research revealed that Glenn's fiancée, Shirley, came from a wealthy family that owned several car dealerships across Central Texas. This was going to be a big fancy affair with all their friends and extended family in attendance. It was perfect. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for what I was already thinking of as the most important presentation of my life. I had my attorney review the eviction documents one more time, making sure every detail was legally sound and properly notarized. I purchased a new suit, black and severe, the kind of outfit that commanded respect and attention. Most importantly, I hired a discreet photographer to document the event. I wanted a record of everything that was about to happen, both for legal purposes and for my own satisfaction. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons I should just mail the eviction notice and move on with my life. But every time I wavered, I remembered sleeping in my car while they lived in my house, remembered working 3 jobs, while they spent my inheritance, remembered 11 years of believing I wasn't good enough when the truth was that they were thieves. By morning, my resolve was absolute. It was time for them to learn what I was really capable of. The Hill Country venue was exactly what I'd expected from Glenn's wedding, sprawling, expensive, and designed to impress. Rolling hills covered in wildflowers stretched to the horizon, and the main building was a rustic but elegant structure that probably cost more to rent for one day than most people made in a month. I arrived during the cocktail hour when guests were mingling on the covered patio and the bride and groom were taking photos with family. I'd timed it perfectly to make an entrance during the reception, when everyone would be gathered in one place and the mood would be celebratory and relaxed. From the parking lot, I could see Harold and Martha near the bar, dressed in clothes that were clearly new and expensive. Harold looked older than I'd expected, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. Martha had gained weight and was trying to hide it with a dress that was too young for her, but she looked happy in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. Glenn looked confident and handsome in his tuxedo, holding court with a group of friends near the dance floor. His bride Shirley was beautiful in the way that money could buy: perfect dress, perfect hair, perfect makeup, surrounded by bridesmaids who all looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. For just a moment, watching them celebrate, I felt a pang of something that might have been regret. This could have been my family. I could have been the sister dancing at her brother's wedding, the daughter that Harold and Martha were proud to introduce to their friends. But then I remembered the documents in my briefcase, and the feeling passed. I waited until after dinner, when the speeches were finished and people were starting to relax with drinks and conversation. The photographer I'd hired was positioned discreetly near the entrance, ready to document everything that was about to happen. I walked through the crowd with my head high and my shoulders back, carrying my briefcase like it contained nothing more interesting than work documents. A few people looked at me curiously, probably wondering who I was and why I was dressed so formally for a casual reception. Harold saw me first. I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. He nudged Martha, who turned around and went completely pale when she spotted me walking toward their table. "Beverly?" Martha said, her voice barely audible over the music and conversation around us. "I can't believe you showed up here." "I wouldn't miss my brother's special day," I replied, keeping my voice light and pleasant. "Congratulations to the happy family." Glenn had noticed the commotion and was walking over with Shirley, his expression unreadable. The bride looked confused, clearly not knowing who I was or why my presence was causing such obvious tension. "Bev," Glenn said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," I said. "Glenn, you look wonderful. Marriage suits you already." The small talk continued for a few more minutes, with Harold and Martha shooting worried glances at each other, and Glenn trying to maintain the facade that this was a normal family reunion. Other guests were starting to notice the awkward energy at our table, turning to stare at the unknown woman who'd appeared at the wedding. Finally, Glenn stood up and asked if he could say a few words to the assembled guests. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about how lucky he felt to have found Shirley, and made special mention of how grateful he was for the support of his family. "I especially want to thank my parents, Harold and Martha Thompson," he said, raising his champagne glass toward their table. "None of this would have been possible without their love and support throughout my life." The applause was warm and genuine. Harold beamed with pride, and Martha actually wiped away a tear. It was a perfect moment of family happiness and celebration, which made it the perfect moment for me to destroy their world. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my suit jacket and walking to the center of the room where everyone could see me clearly. The conversations gradually died down as people realized something was happening. "I hope you don't mind if I say a few words as well," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. I'm Beverly Thompson, Glenn's sister. A murmur went through the crowd. Several people glanced back and forth between me and the family table, clearly trying to figure out why there was so much tension in the air. I want to thank my family too. I continued opening my briefcase and removing the legal documents inside. 11 years ago, they taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. They taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, that family doesn't guarantee love, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most willing to betray you. The room was completely silent now. Harold was half standing like he wanted to stop me but didn't know how. Martha's face had gone from pale to bright red. Glenn looked like he was going to be sick. You see, when I was 18 years old, my parents here threw me out of the house for accepting a college scholarship they didn't approve of. They told me I'd never amount to anything without this family. They gave me $50 and slammed the door in my face. I could hear shocked whispers from the wedding guests. Several people were looking at Harold and Martha with expressions of horror and disbelief. What they didn't tell me, I continued, was that the house they threw me out of was never actually theirs to begin with. It belonged to my grandmother, Margaret, who left it to me in her will when I turned 21. They stole my inheritance, forged legal documents, and watched me sleep in my car while they lived in my house. The whispers were getting louder. Someone near the back of the room gasped audibly. Harold was on his feet now, his face purple with rage. "That's enough," he shouted. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied calmly, holding up the legal documents. "I have copies of grandmother's original will, the forged documents you filed with the probate court, and the correspondence that proves Glenn knew about the inheritance from the beginning." I turned to look directly at my brother, who had gone completely white. "You knew? Didn't you, Glenn? You knew when they kicked me out that I legally owned the house. You knew when I was working 3 jobs just to survive that there was $50,000 sitting in an account that belonged to me. You knew and you said nothing." Glenn opened his mouth like he wanted to deny it, but no words came out. The guilt was written all over his face, and everyone in the room could see it. "So I want to thank you," I said, turning back to address the entire room. "Thank you for teaching me that I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. Thank you for motivating me to build a business that's now worth millions of dollars. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to deliver this." I walked over to Harold and Martha's table and placed the eviction notice directly in front of them. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The house you stole from me is being foreclosed, and I am the new owner of the mortgage." Martha started crying loud, ugly sobs that echoed through the silent room. Harold was staring at the documents like they might disappear if he looked at them hard enough. "You said I'd be nothing without this family," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "Turns out I became everything despite this family." I closed my briefcase, nodded politely to the shocked wedding guests, and walked out of the venue with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting as the family tried to explain what had just happened to their horrified friends and relatives. It was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. The immediate aftermath of the wedding confrontation was exactly what I'd expected: chaos, denial, and desperate attempts to reach me through every channel they could think of. My business phone rang constantly for the first week, with Harold leaving increasingly frantic voicemails begging me to call him back so we could work this out like family. Martha tried a different approach, sending long emails full of apologies and explanations about how they'd always planned to tell me about the inheritance someday, how they'd been protecting the money for me, how everything they'd done had been out of love and concern for my future. Glenn's messages were the hardest to read. My brother, who'd stood by silently while our parents stole from me, who'd known the truth for 11 years and never said a word, now wanted to meet for coffee to clear the air and rebuild our relationship. I deleted every message without responding. 30 days later, when they failed to vacate the property, I began formal foreclosure proceedings. The local sheriff's department served them with final eviction papers, and they had 72 hours to remove their belongings before being physically removed from the premises. They left on the last possible day, loading their possessions into a U-Haul truck, while neighbors watched from their yards. I wasn't there to see it, but my attorney's office received confirmation that the property had been surrendered and was now under my complete legal control. For the first time in 11 years, I owned the house where I'd grown up. Standing in the empty rooms a week later, I felt a complex mix of emotions that I hadn't been prepared for. The house was smaller than I remembered, shabbier than it had seemed when I was young. The wallpaper was peeling in places, the carpet was worn thin, and there was a musty smell that suggested problems with the plumbing or ventilation. But it was mine. The house my great-grandfather had built, that my grandmother had loved, that should have been my sanctuary during the hardest years of my life, was finally mine. I walked through each room, remembering moments from my childhood, studying at the kitchen table while dinner cooked on the stove, reading in my tiny bedroom during summer afternoons, sitting on the front porch with Grandma Margaret, while she told me stories about the strong women in our family who'd never let anyone tell them what they couldn't do. The victory felt different than I'd expected. I'd imagined that reclaiming the house would feel triumphant and satisfying, that seeing my parents' defeat would heal something that had been broken inside me for years. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, like I'd won a war but lost something important in the process. That's when I realized that holding on to anger for 11 years, that spending so much energy on revenge and justice, had cost me more than I'd understood. I'd built a successful life, but I'd built it around the need to prove something to people who weren't worth proving anything to. I'd let my family's betrayal define me just as much as if I'd never left home at all. The house sat empty for 6 months while I figured out what to do with it. I considered moving back in, reclaiming my childhood bedroom, and making new memories in the place that had held so much pain. But every time I walked through those rooms, I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. Finally, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put the house on the market and used the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name. The Margaret Thompson Memorial Scholarship would provide full college funding for students from difficult family situations, young people who were trying to build better lives without support from home. The scholarship recipients would be chosen based on academic merit, financial need, and a personal essay about overcoming family obstacles to pursue their dreams. Every year, I would personally meet with the scholarship winners and offer them mentorship and support throughout their college careers. It felt like the right way to honor both my grandmother's memory and the lessons I'd learned from my own struggles. Instead of holding on to a house full of painful memories, I could help other young people avoid the kind of desperate poverty I'd experienced when my family abandoned me. The first scholarship was awarded to an 18-year-old girl named Maria Santos, whose parents had disowned her for refusing an arranged marriage so she could attend medical school. When I met Maria at the scholarship ceremony, I saw something in her eyes that I recognized: the fierce determination that comes from having no choice but to succeed. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she said after the ceremony, shaking my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone so young. "You're giving yourself the chance," I replied. "I'm just making sure money isn't the thing that stops you." Working with scholarship recipients over the following months taught me something I hadn't expected: that helping other people heal was helping me heal too. Every time I mentored a student who was struggling with family rejection, every time I helped someone navigate the challenges of building an independent life, I felt a little more of my own anger dissolving. I started seeing a therapist to work through the complex emotions that came with having achieved the revenge I'd dreamed about for so long. Dr. Patricia Williams helped me understand that holding on to resentment, even justified resentment, was like carrying a backpack full of rocks everywhere I went. "You don't forgive people because they deserve it," she explained during one of our sessions. "You forgive them because you deserve peace." I'm not sure I'll ever completely forgive my family for what they did to me. The betrayal was too deep, the consequences too significant, the cruelty too calculated. But I've learned to stop carrying their actions around with me like a burden I'm required to bear forever. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected letter from Glenn. My brother had tracked down my business address again and sent what amounted to a full confession and apology. He admitted knowing about the inheritance, acknowledged his role in enabling our parents' theft, and expressed genuine remorse for the pain his silence had caused. The letter ended with an invitation to meet for coffee, no expectations or agenda. Just a chance to see if we could find any common ground as adults. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I ever will. But I kept the letter. Today my life looks nothing like what I thought it would when I was 18 years old and sleeping in my car. Texas Strategic Solutions has offices in 3 states and revenues approaching $10 million annually. I own a beautiful home in Westlake Hills with a view of the lake and enough space for the family I hope to have someday. More importantly, I've learned to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and shared history. My closest friends are people who value my thoughts and opinions, who celebrate my successes without resentment, who show up when I need support without keeping score. The Margaret Thompson Memorial Scholarship has helped 15 students so far, with 5 more starting college this fall. Watching them succeed, seeing them build the lives they've dreamed of, despite difficult circumstances, has given me more satisfaction than any business achievement or financial milestone. Sometimes I drive past my old neighborhood and slow down when I pass the house where I grew up. The new owners have painted it yellow and planted flower gardens in the front yard. There's a swing set in the backyard and children's bicycles on the driveway. It looks like a happy house now, full of the kind of family love I always wanted but never had. I'm glad someone is making good memories there. As for my family, I hear updates occasionally through mutual acquaintances in Austin's business community. Harold found work with another construction company, though at a much lower position than he'd held before. Martha is working full-time at the grocery store and seems to have settled into the reality of their reduced circumstances. Glenn and Shirley are still married, living in a modest apartment while they save money for a house down payment. His wedding day humiliation apparently motivated him to take more responsibility for his finances and his life choices. I don't know if any of them have learned the lessons I hope to teach them with my dramatic confrontation. I don't know if they understand the real cost of their betrayal or if they've developed any genuine remorse for what they put me through. But I've learned something more important: that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life so fulfilling, so successful, so genuinely happy that their opinions and actions become irrelevant. They said I'd be nothing without their family. What they never understood is that with a family like that, I was already nothing. Leaving them behind didn't diminish me. It set me free to discover who I really was and what I was actually capable of achieving. The house was never really about the house. It was about proving to myself that I was worth fighting for, that my dreams and ambitions and sense of justice mattered even when the people who were supposed to love me said they didn't. I fought for myself and I won. Everything else was just the details. Today I measure my success not by the money in my bank account or the size of my business, but by the peace I feel when I wake up each morning. I built a life they said was impossible, surrounded myself with people who see my worth, and found ways to turn my pain into purpose for others who are fighting similar battles. That's a victory that no one can ever take away from me. And in the end, that was the greatest gift my family could have given me. The motivation to discover that I was stronger than they ever imagined and more capable of love than they ever deserved. What do you think about family dynamics like this? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own dreams? Drop a comment below and let me know how you would have handled this situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building the life you deserve. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that sometimes the best thing family can do for you is show you exactly who you don't want to become. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by the people who refuse to see it. Keep fighting for your dreams, and never let anyone convince you that you're not enough exactly as you are.